We've been touring every overclock in Deep Rock Galactic over the last few weeks, and today is the final stop, on the first third of our journey. Gunnar finally gets a turn to play with his well-rounded minigun and versatile Bulldog revolver. We're starting things off with Bullet Hell. This overclock is disliked to say the least, but while I can see why, I don't share the sentiment. It gives your bullets a 75% chance to ricochet into nearby enemies regardless of what part of the enemy you hit, or even if you hit them at all. It's sort of like a juiced up chain hit, but the trade-off is a big DPS and accuracy penalty. You'll definitely feel both of these penalties hard, and it makes tougher targets into a big problem for the minigun, but it's great at cleaning up small crowds of smaller enemies, keeping your flank covered with damage and stuns, and overall making mincemeat out of large crowds. It does so slowly though, so you'll want to be equipped to compensate. Up next is Rotary Overdrive. This gives you a fire rate boost and some coolant charges in exchange for a big heat generation increase. This overclock has a great synergy with hot bullets or aggressive venting. The extra heat generation means you'll reach the heat threshold those upgrades require faster, and the coolant charges mean you can stay in them for longer. They also instantly recover the gun from overheating, so if you're the kind of gunner who overheats a lot, it could be a big help for getting back in the fight. Even without those synergies, the extra fire rate boost is an appreciable DPS increase that you'll enjoy. And now on to Lead Storm. This gives a massive damage boost in exchange for crippling your defensive capabilities while firing. You can't move and the weapon's stun is almost completely nullified. It can still rarely happen, but even if you're lucky enough to trigger it, most enemies will barely flinch. It's still something, but it's not reliable. This is a great overclock for putting out tons of damage super fast, but you really have to learn how and when to use it to avoid getting mobbed. Shields are your friend here, but if you're looking for something a bit more sustainable, you can start firing in the air and keep the momentum from your jump. Up next we have a little more oomph. This clean overclock gives a slight boost to damage and a decrease in spin-up time. This makes the gun more responsive and slightly more powerful overall. It's a great clean for those who like the minigun exactly as it is but just wanted to do what it does faster. Now moving on to Burning Hell. This overclock gives you a sort of cone of heat in front of your weapon, burning enemies very quickly. It's great for mopping up swarmers and is a reliable and high ammo way of setting things on fire for combos with Volatile Bullets. Just remember that the heat only works at close range. The only real downside of this overclock is a higher heat generation, and unlike Rotary Overdrive, there's no coolant to offset it. Manage it carefully or use it to trigger aggressive venting faster. Compact feed mechanism gives you more ammo in exchange for fire rate. This is a great overclock for making sure you never run out of ammo no matter how much you lean on the minigun. The slower fire rate does hurt your DPS, but if you take the damage upgrade in tier 2 instead of ammo, you'll end up with slightly more DPS and a bit more ammo as well. Feel free to lean more heavily into ammo though, and you'll never run out again. You will feel the DPS penalty if you do that though, so be careful. Thinned drum walls is a clean that gives you a bit more ammo and a higher cooling rate. The small ammo boost is nice, and the cooling rate is great for keeping your gun from overheating. It is a lot harder to trigger aggressive venting because of that though, since the gun sheds heat so quickly now you'll need to be firing almost constantly all the way up the heat meter. It is a lot better with hot bullets though, being significantly easier to stay in that high range without overheating and increasing your uptime in the process. And lastly, exhaust vectoring gives you an accuracy penalty in exchange for a damage boost. It's a good DPS booster for medium range engagements, but it does make it harder to snipe down distant enemies with. You'll likely have your secondary or teammates to take care of that in a general scenario though, so all you'll really need to worry about is needing to be a bit closer to whatever it is you're aiming at. On to the Bulldog. I used 6-shooter for the minigun testing, so we'll start there. 6-shooter bumps your mag size up to 6 and gives you a big fire rate boost along with an increase in ammo, and all in exchange for just a little extra spread and a longer reload time. It's good for sniping spitters, but it also has a much higher burst potential overall, being able to unload 6 rounds in less time than it takes for the base Bulldog to unload 4. Once you fire those 6 rounds, it does take longer to reload, so you'll want to be prepared for that. Having more ammo rather than a big damage boost, this overclock also makes a good burst weapon for lighter crowds of tough targets, like Mactera. Overall, it's a great fallback for when the minigun is overheated, while still having good burst potential for when you need it. Chain Hit is basically a copy of the same overclock for the Sabata. Your weak point hits have a 75% chance to ricochet into a nearby enemy. First off, I'd like to clarify this time that while the ricochet does do full damage, it can still hit armor and have its damage reduced or even nullified depending on what armor it hits, so it's not just free extra damage. Overall, it's a decent clean though that's good for paring down crowds. Volatile Bullets reduces the gun's damage, but gives a massive damage bonus against burning targets. If you have a reliable way to set things on fire, like say burning hell on the minigun, this becomes an incredible burst damage option for tough targets. Most smaller enemies likely won't survive being set on fire enough for the damage boost to matter, but you can expect to get good spikes of damage off against guards, praetorians, oppressors, and even some tankier specials like wardens. Overall, the lower damage does make the gun less powerful to use independently, so you'll really need to lean into that synergy to get anything useful out of this overclock. Up next is Magic Bullets. This is sort of like Chain Hit in that it allows your bullets to ricochet, but this one always ricochets, but only when the bullet hits terrain. It also comes with a significant damage penalty and an ammo boost. The main thing that jumped out to me with this overclock is that it's a great option for shooting down spitters. You effectively have a grace window around the spitter, but you'll still basically hit them, which means it's much more reliable to shoot them with, especially in the dark or in a rush. I also tried using it to get the weak points of praetorians, but the ricochet range is so short that it almost felt impractical versus just running around behind them. Overall, it's still a good option if you find yourself missing a lot of shots, and I'd imagine it would also pair well with blow through to clean up crowds, although I didn't think to try that upgrade. Elephant Rounds is the big spike damage overclock for the Bulldog. This overclock doubles your damage and halves the base spread of the gun, making it more accurate, but massively spikes the recoil and spread per shot along with an ammo, reload time, and mag size penalty. It's basically impossible to accurately hit 2 shots in quick succession. It might seem great at bursting down tough targets, and you can certainly build it that way, but I also found success building it to one-shot grunts through their armor and pairing it with blow through to cleave apart crowds. Whichever option you choose, you can expect it to pack a real punch. And finally, Homebrew Powder. Now this is the third time now we've covered a Homebrew Powder overclock, and I'm completely out of original things to say about it. This one is a balanced and not a clean though, but all that really means is the damage range is 75% to 200% instead of the previous 80 to 140%. That does make it a pretty significant 37% average damage boost though, so if you're lucky, this could end up being pretty powerful. And that's every overclock for the minigun and the Bulldog. There's lots of raw power available to you here, you just have to pick the form you're most comfortable using it in.